So this annual event is organised by a local committee composed of both Jews and Christians. So we welcome you all here to this meeting. As I just mentioned, our main speaker is unable to be with us, and she contacted me yesterday morning with the news, and she's very disappointed to let us down. But we will be seeing later on a short video of her story, so she will be here in present, but not in person. Now we do have with us this evening the Senate member for the Clwyd West, Darren Miller, and the North Wales Regional Senate member, Sam Rowlands. We also have here the chairman of Conwy County Borough Council, the mayors of Abergele, Colwyn Bay, deputy mayor of Llandudno. Is that right? I think I've got all those right, haven't I? Yeah, good. But a particular welcome also to those who have come across the border today from England in order to be at this evening's commemoration, especially Rabbi Amir, who's going to be speaking to us later on. I should say, in terms of the invited guests, that local MP Robin Miller had originally intended being here, but has been told he's got to attend a meeting in Westminster first thing tomorrow morning, and that means you have to go down on Sunday evening. There's no way otherwise he could get there, so he was very disappointed. He's had to cry off. And our local Assembly member, Janet V. Saunders, is also unable to be with us, but sent her greetings. So also here as taking part as our guests, we've got a couple of students from St. David's College who are going to be sharing with us very shortly, and another one student from the same college who's going to be providing a musical item, and also some more students from Ysgol in Conwy. They will also be sharing with us later on, which is really, really good. But to begin, really, some of our invited guests are now going to light the 6 memorial candles in memory of the more than 6 million Jewish people who died during the Holocaust. So would you like to come up, please? It's good to know that some of our schools have a regular programme that takes some of these students to Auschwitz, and this year our school's coordinator, Sian Asbridge, has arranged for 2 St. David's College students who have experienced that trip to address us. That's Billy Griffiths and James Taylor. Would you like to come and share now?
Good evening. I'm James Taylor.
And I'm Billy Griffiths.
We are honoured to have been invited to come and speak to you today and share our experiences of our recent visit to Auschwitz. Entering Auschwitz, you pass through the main gates and underneath this sign. Work sets you free. This is a very difficult statement to see, given the empty promise it holds, knowing the hard work forced upon the victims too often resulted in their death. I find it upsetting that the victims received only pain and suffering, and were so severely exploited during their imprisonment, all whilst receiving the unrealistic hope of being allowed to continue their life after Auschwitz. It is particularly difficult to see today as we all associate hard work with success and reward, and for the victims not to receive anything but suffering for their work is deeply saddening.
So the picture on the left, that is the first part of Auschwitz we saw from the tour guide. We hadn't even gone through the gates yet, and the lady was basically talking about the area. And this was in the Auschwitz 1, the smaller part of it, not Birkenheim. So I took that picture on the left, basically just because it looked like a fairly normal place. I didn't even know that was part of it. I didn't know it was, and I just thought it looked like an interesting thing to take a picture of, so we could see what some of it looks like. The second bit was just after we'd gone through the sign that my friend had talked about. It shows a lot of the chimneys, and it shows the double barbed wire gates that they were talking about. Now, they told us about how these gates were electrified, so people who tried to escape through them and touch them were basically fried. And they said how the gates went underground to stop people from digging out. It essentially just showed how horrid and how it was such a prison and designed to keep these innocent people from getting out for doing nothing wrong but living. A feeling that I got from being there was it was quite like a factory, but that's essentially what it was. It was a designed death camp, really. And there was a quote we got from the guide: it's not a work camp, it's a death camp. That's what the guide told us that some of these German officers would say, and it made the place feel a whole lot more evil and sickening.
I'm going to focus on this right-hand image. This shows where executions took place, something I had not previously been aware happened at Auschwitz. You can see the building on the right and the windows of the basement. The end one is significantly smaller than the others, as this is for the suffocation cell. There is no photography allowed in the basement, but I can distinctly remember the cell. It was relatively small and empty, where prisoners would be locked in for days to die through asphyxiation. I cannot imagine how painful this slow and distressing death must have been. I do not understand how someone could do this to another human. Walking back up the staircase from the basement was deeply painful, knowing how some prisoners had walked down this same staircase, but they had been unable to walk back out.
These two photos that I took, the one on the left was a picture of the entrance we took into the gas chambers. Now, this was, I think, the only gas chamber throughout all the sites which is still intact, hadn't been destroyed. And going through that was one of the most impactful places in the entire trip. We were told about how it was designed and how, the people were crammed in there and the gas was poured in. Going in there, it just felt empty and wrong. If you looked at the walls, you could see marks which were just disgusting to even think about. And the photo on the left, which I took, was probably one of the most impactful ones to me. As you can see the sign, you can't see it very well here, but it was a sign which I think said stop, and it had a death scale symbol, and that was in front of the watchtower with the fencing. That to me made it look a whole lot more like a prison rather than a work camp, and that's what it was. It just symbolises the evilness and the, death of that place.
During the visit, we walked past massive display cabinets containing piles of possessions. This image shows victims' glasses. The experience really helped visualise just how many suffered during the Holocaust. It was shocking to see how everyone was stripped of all of their possessions. Even their shoes were taken from them, which now fill an entire room. There is also a cabinet full of victims' hair. which had been cut off with the intention of being used to make rope. I remember feeling shock of the pure dehumanisation of the victims.
So these next photos are from the second part of it, which when I first went, I thought it was only one camp. I was unaware that it was multiple camps. This one, my pronunciation is awful, but it's Birkenhound. The first picture on the left, that is probably the most well-known photo of the camps. And seeing that, me and a few others said it just felt extremely haunted. And there's no other real way to describe it, apart from just feeling not right, unnatural, just haunted. The second photo is one I took of the inside, and it shows how big it was, just how massive it was. Each one of those, can't see very well, but the barracks that were there, they were all made of wood, so they'd rotten away, and it was just the chimneys left. And it was hard to imagine. Each one of those little things was a massive barrack, which is what all these people were crammed into to be tortured and suffered throughout. But yeah, and also we were told that all of it was made by slave labour, and no Germans did any work apart from harming the people who were there. So it felt, as I said before, evil and disgusting.
This shows the rail cart used to transport victims to Auschwitz. Packed inside, victims may have been held for days on end. It was deeply saddening to see how humans could be treated so poorly. As you can see, there are no windows on the cart. It is upsetting to realise how disorientated and fearful the victims must have been. When they arrived, learning of the sorting between those who would live and work and those who would die. I cannot imagine how those responsible for this could live with themselves every day, deciding who was allowed to live. It is challenging to learn how the victims were treated as just workers and not the human beings they were.
These two photos that I took were of, I think it was there was two gas chambers there. This is one I was able to take photos of, and both of these gas chambers were blown up, I think by the Nazis to cover up what happened. This location was probably one of the hardest places to stand and look at, because that area there was the site of so many people suffering and brutal executions. Yeah, it's quite a strong thing for me to look back at, knowing what it is. And yeah, it's disgusting how the people who've done it had tried to hide it by blowing up, destroying the evidence, further adding to the unnerving feeling and sadistic mindset of the people who were running this.
This shows inside barracks inhabited by victims during the Holocaust. Featuring racks 3 high, victims slept in cramped and often freezing conditions. There are simply no words to describe the inhumane living arrangements. It is amazing how anyone was able to survive Auschwitz.
These next 3 photos, the one on the left was a part of the memorial plaques. There was so many plaques there, one for each native language of the person who was held there and a victim of this atrocity. It's talking about what happened and basically saying how we shouldn't forget it because we need to learn from it to make sure it doesn't happen again. The photo on the right, top one, that was a bird's eye picture taken by one of the planes flying over it, and that just again shows the size of the camp. And we were told it wasn't even fully finished. It was still under construction. And it's just showing it, it's mad to see. That entire massive area was home to so much suffering and death. And the picture on the bottom right was when we left camp and we talked to a Holocaust survivor. and that was me reading the poem there. That was given to me by one of the survivors that I was told that I could read out. And being able to read some of the work that they'd given me felt like a massive honour, despite being to that disgusting place. I think that's the end of this slide. I just want to say thank you to everyone for having us here. It's majorly important that we're able to see these things so we can learn and ensure history isn't repeated again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to both of you and James. That's really good. Thank you for sharing your experience. Some of the students from Ysgol, Dyffryn, Conwy are going to entertain us again. This time we have a vocal ensemble accompanied on the piano by the music teacher, Laurie Williams. They will be singing Dola Dros y Môr, which is translated in English usually as Hands Across the Sea.
Ysgol
Thank you very much, Larry, and also obviously your students that came along. That was wonderful to hear, that really was. Well, actually, the theme of using schools continues with our next speaker. Last year I was given a copy of a new book called Escape the Gwrych Castle, about the Jewish community who lived at the castle near Abergele during the early part of the Second World War. I'm sure those of you who've come across from England, coming along the A55, will have seen the castle up on the hill on the left-hand side as you drive over towards this way. And you've seen the castle up there. Well, that is the castle we're talking about, Gwrych Castle. But I found the book an absolutely fascinating read. I can highly recommend it. The author of that book is Andrew Heskett, who is the assistant head teacher at Ysgol Conwy. So that's where the teaching theme continues. And he's going to share some of the story with us now. Thank you, Andrew.
Firstly, thank you very much for the invite tonight to briefly give you an outline of the content of the book. It is a story that, for whatever reason, has been forgotten, but incredibly important. Between August 1939 and September 1941, the largest single grouping of Jewish refugees anywhere in the United Kingdom was in Abergele. The group that was there was comprised of over 200 young people, aged 14 to 18, all of whom arrived in Britain on kinder transport. Their ambition, their intention to create a Hakshara, an agricultural training centre to prepare themselves for a hoped-for future as pioneers in the land of Israel. The story begins really in Kristallnacht in 1938, the Nazi-inspired attack upon Jewish people in Germany and also over in Austria. As a result of which, there was a realization by some people that something needed to be done, but very few countries seemed to be willing. Only Britain offered a potential escape, but only to the young people. The consequence of that was the creation of kinder transport. Over the next 10 months or so, approximately 10,000 young people came to Britain. The vast majority were taken into foster care, but a significant number found themselves awaiting the placement and living in reception camps, normally the southeast of England. And it was in those camps that an idea was born. The idea of creating Hakshara. Rather than just waiting for foster care, take groups of children, put them into residential training centres and prepare them. Around 20 were created around the United Kingdom. Most of them only housed 20, 30, 40 young people. But there was an idea by an organisation called Bakad to create a super centre, a flagship model for the entire movement, somewhere that would not house 20, 30 or 40, but over 200. The reason it hadn't happened was simply because they had to find a location that satisfied several criteria, such as those listed on the screen behind me. And it wasn't until August 1939 that a property became available that literally ticked all the boxes. And that, of course, was Gwrych Castle in Abergele. Literally, in the couple of days before the outbreak of war, 200 people found themselves transported from across various reception camps in Britain to Abergele. In that number were included a group of 31 young people who arrived in Britain on the very last kinder transport to successfully escape mainland Europe. The idea was the idea of this man, a very important man, Aria Handler, aged just 24 at this time. Inspired already and been working for years in getting young people and other people to Palestine, now based in Britain, continued his work from there. He and his older brother Julius came to Abergele, looked at it, thought it was ideal. As part of the research for this book, I got to know these people very well, not necessarily firsthand. Many of them I did get to speak to, in many cases through their children or grandchildren. But the Handler brothers were quite incredible. Julius Handler, not only a doctor, a medical doctor, an incredibly skilled musician, and his role at the centre in Abergele was also key for another reason. He was just incredible in the way that he could inspire people, calm people. We must remember the trauma that these young people had experienced and were experiencing. He was the sort of person who could raise spirits, the sort of person, in fact, when given a drum set, would put a cymbal on his head. They were joined by Owen Seligman, one of my favourite characters, very modest, very quiet, effectively in charge of the well-being of students, as we would now say, but kept himself in the background as the picture on the right so clearly illustrates. But the young people absolutely adored him. And finally, as a mark of just how important the Abergele Centre was, it was the only Hackshire in the whole of the United Kingdom to have a rabbi permanently attached to it. Rabbi Schmalzberger, who arrived with his wife and young children. They were joined by around about 50, the numbers varied over time, but around 50 young Jewish people, mostly aged 18 to 24, who were volunteers. They would work for nothing, minor expenses, a roof over their head and food, but beyond that, their job was to help and assist. And then, of course, the children themselves. Initially over 200, by the time the centre closed, over 300 young people had been through the centre in Abergele. They were truly a remarkable group. They were not entirely handpicked, but a significant number were. This was the flagship centre. It could not afford to fail. And so many of them were chosen for their abilities. The book recounts the stories of many of them. I don't have time for that, unfortunately, this evening. But for example, John Edelman, the top left-hand corner, the first young Jewish refugee to encounter a local and be incredibly surprised that the local spoke a language that wasn't German or English. The bottom right-hand corner, Herman Rothman, photographed a few years later after he'd left the centre and joined the British Army, as most of the young people did, or served in the war economy in some way, became an interpreter for the army and was actually involved in translating Hitler's will. One of my favourite characters, but I can never get an actual picture of him, Jesse Zieler in the top right-hand corner, who amused himself for 2 years walking around a bowler hat. Wolfgang Billig later changed his name to Walter Bingham, took part in D-Day, changed his name simply in case he was captured, and that was a bit of a giveaway. Later received a military medal and the Legion d'Honneur from France. These were an incredible group of young people. The castle itself, when they arrived, it has this outward grandeur, but inside was ruined. It hadn't been lived in for the best part of 15 years, and although it should have looked like the picture on the left, it more resembled the picture on the right. They did their best. Part of the task, part of the test, was to become a self-sufficient community. And so in the early days, with no running water, or very limited running water, with no electricity, no heating, no food, no beds, they collected straw and slept on the floors. Over the next few days, things began to improve. A huge donation from Marks & Spencer came in, beds, supplies, and so on. And then the work of establishing a Hackshire could really begin. A typical week would have the students divided into two. For half of the day, they worked on local farms, free of charge, they were free labour. And on those local farms, they began to learn those agricultural skills they would need. Initially, menial tasks, but over time were involved in cattle breeding, dairy work, and so on. Local farmers really valued them. They made a significant contribution to the local economy. The other half of the day, education, primarily religious, but also some secular education, in this case being carried out by the rabbi. They also, of course, observed religious practices. This was largely a Zionist group. This is a group of young people on the eve of Passover, 1940. And they also had work to do around the castle and the estate. Forestry work to collect logs for the fires in the top left-hand corner. And they knew they could never achieve complete self-sufficiency, but they did try their best. They set up their own carpentry shop, their own tailors, their own laundry, and even their own hair salon. And the normal chores, cleaning the castle and working in the kitchen. These incidentally are all photographs of the community in the castle. There wasn't much time left for leisure, but there was some, and they used it. They got out and about, mainly in Abergele, but also the entire local area, once they figured out how buses worked and things like that. Nature animals were a particularly big interest of many of them. This is a group, I think roughly at Tamagopra in Abergele, pausing for sandwiches on the way. And just general messing about. They were a group of young people. They fell in love, they fell out of love, they played pranks on each other, they bullied each other, they did what young people did. They had a life very different to the one that those young people told us about earlier at Auschwitz, where of course many of their parents and other relatives found themselves there or in other locations. One of the children from the refugees I spoke to, not far before Christmas, gave me a wonderful quote. He'd read the book and described it as a story of darkness into light. And for these young people, there really was some light. I wish I'd had that quote at the time I was writing it, however. So their own football team. They lost their very first game and then won every single one. Played teams from Conwy Bay all around the area. And most importantly, they established friendships. Most of them knew nobody when they arrived. The trauma of their previous few years, the trauma of King's transport, the trauma of a reception camp, the trauma of what on earth their future was. They formed incredibly strong bonds, in many cases lifelong friendships. And they also formed strong bonds with Abergele itself. They wanted to be contributors. They contributed to the local economy, but they also contributed to the town itself. On the left, New York Terrace, that most of them would have walked past on their way into the town, and on the right-hand side of the main street in Abergele. I chose that picture because you can just see a policeman stood in the corner. I'll just choose him as one example of many local people who befriended the group, P.C. Sam Williams. For those who read the book starts with him, encountering a small group of refugees in the town who see him, panic and run, and he chases them. The young people, of course, were scared of anybody in uniform. But having discovered who they were, he began to befriend the group and began to introduce them to the fact that they were safe. He played a straight back, mind. He did prosecute them for breaking blackout rules as well. But the youngsters, once they got over their initial fears, and they were very scared at the beginning of anti-Semitism or the experience they'd had before, they assumed they would have here. But once those fears had begun to diminish, they were in and out all the time, on bicycles. And on the farms, although they didn't get paid, they very often received backhanders from farmers. And once they got some, they went straight to town and did two main things: buy chocolate and go to the cinema. The local cinema owner was very, very good, let most of them in for free or for reduced prices. One of the young person who was 96 when I interviewed him, could remember this very day, his very first film, The Wizard of Oz. He had absolutely no idea what it was about. And I've watched it many times and I have no idea what it's about. But he thoroughly enjoyed it, and it imprinted itself on his memory for life. But the centre couldn't last forever. It wasn't intended to last forever, but the world shortened it. The war did not go well. And after Dunkirk, changing leadership led to the concept of the internment of enemy aliens. Anyone aged 16 or above, of German or Austrian origin, was to be arrested. A significant number of the older students and the leaders of the caste community fitted that particular category, and they were taken away. To some extent, that wasn't the end but it was the beginning of the end. Just weeks or months before, all of them, in this particular case, Erwin Seligman, had stood in front of tribunals and proved themselves not to be enemies of the state and received these certificates of proof. And yet after June 1940, things changed. This is a certificate of one of the young people who was actually interned, and it says on the label that he was at the castle prior to internment. But it wasn't just that. Other things happened as well. The wrecked car on the right, the photograph of the car crash that took the lives of one of the leaders, unfortunately. But other issues, financial issues, the moving on of the young people when they achieved the age of 18, the fact that killer transport had, of course, now stopped at the outbreak of war, meant that it began a slow decline. There was one last major moment that all of the youngsters remembered as one of the greatest moments of all. The marriage of Aria Handler and his wife, which, although it took place in Registry Office in London, was celebrated in Jewish fashion at the castle, with dignitaries from other centres from across the UK attending. It was a final hurrah because on that particular day, the decision was taken to close the centre down. Over the next few months, the young people themselves began to be dispersed to other centres that were more economical to run, or, in many cases, particularly those approaching the age of 18, just simply leave and start a new life. But the memory is perhaps the important part. Besides Finley, who was just 17 when he arrived at the castle, never forgot. And neither did Aria Handler. Despite a life going on to greater things, he was present at the Declaration of Israel. He became a key figure in Jewish circles and the Board of Jewish Deputies, he knew prime ministers, but never forgot the importance of the government. And hopefully, tonight, we can factor that into the wider story. I'll leave the final words to the 96-year-old who went to see The Wizard of Oz. I asked him the impossible question as an interview, a terrible question really. I asked him, could you in one sentence sum it up? And his answer was that. It was a happy time within a sad time. Thank you.
For you.
Okay.
Why? Why did you decide to do this? There's an immense amount of research. If you look at the book, it's got about 500 endnotes, I think, or something like that, all references as to where he got his information from. Why? What was it that led you to do that? You didn't know that was coming.
No, I didn't know that was coming. The answer, I've asked this before, I wish I got a better answer because it sounds very cheesy. It sounds made up. I moved to Abergele in 1995, and the castle at that time was a complete wreck, and you could just wander around it or whatever. And when my kids were very young, I'm talking sort of 3, 4, 5-year-old, you know what kids like? They don't want to go for a walk. They do like to go for an adventure. So we went for adventures. We go up to the castle, just wander around. It was there I picked up the story that there had been young people there in the war. Initially, there was some confusion whether evacuees or refugees. So the cheesy part is once I figured out they were Jewish refugees, just the thought that I was walking in the footsteps of other fathers' children. And in many cases, there was no reunification. And what began as just an interest developed and grew and frankly became an obsession. So that is cheesy, but that is the truth of the answer.
Thank you. I'll let you go in.
Thank you very much.
I don't know how many of you have actually been to Gwrych Castle, but you can go there now. I'm sure many of you will have seen it on television because it was used for that programme, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of There, when they were using Australia. But I don't think that the Jewish people there would have recognised, you know, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, but I'm a refugee. Thank you for looking after me here. So if you do want to go, I mean, it is now open to the public. You can go in. I don't know how much it costs or whatever, but it is there. And as you're driving on the A55, and you see it up there on the hill, just think, that was the home for 300 Jewish refugees in the first couple of years of the Second World War. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Andrew. It was really good. And you can, of course, buy the book. He didn't advertise it in that way, but you can, of course, buy the book. He hasn't got it with him, but you can buy it. You can buy it on Amazon, for example. Just put the title into Amazon, and that is probably the cheapest way of buying a book rather than going into Waterstones.
It's currently on offer.
I've got nothing against Waterstones, and there are other suppliers. But if you want to get it, it's a thick read, but it's a really good book. Have you got a copy with you?
In the car, sorry. But I'm a terrible self-publisher.
There we go. Okay, but it's a really good read. I did thoroughly enjoy reading it. Okay, what comes next? Yeah, we're going to join in singing them. Seated. As I mentioned earlier, Vivien Churney is unable to be with us due to health. Instead, we are now going to screen some excerpts from her interview with Simon Barrett and Lily's report on Revelation TV last year.
But share with us the difficulties you faced being the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Share with us how difficult that was, knowing all the trauma that your courageous mother went through.
It was told to me by my mother in spurts. It was. She didn't tell me everything all at once. There was little snippets of information, but I knew that there was, as I grew up, that she wasn't like other mothers. That she had a sort of an emotional reaction to something that went on in the war, and sometimes I would ask her questions and she wouldn't answer me, and then sometimes she did sit down and tell me things, and I was absolutely shocked. And it's very hard for children of Holocaust victims because they feel it for their parents. They don't like that upset that you think your parents have been through. So that was the most difficult thing for me, is to hear the things she did eventually tell me.
Yeah, and can you tell us, sadly your mother, is it Sabrine? Died in 1997. Just tell us what kind of woman she was like. Tell us about her character, because you have in history sometimes these incredible people, and your mother's one of them. For the bravery and the courage that she showed, and how her parents as well kind of defied the Nazis and thought outside the box, which is incredible.
I think she always continued to think outside the box. But she was a very strong woman and very courageous. She didn't have an easy life after the war, and even in her marriage, when my father died, that wasn't an easy life for her. So she was very strong, and she taught us to be kind, caring, because she was kind and caring. She taught us to be considerate, but to be strong. And I think we've all inherited that strength from my mother, although none of us are as strong as she was.
So if we start, Vivien, with your grandparents coming from Poland, tell us about their trade, the history of your family in Poland.
My grandfather was a tailor, and he was from Warsaw, as was my grandmother, and they lived there. And at that time, things were fine in Poland. Jews were assimilated into the Polish way of life, and he enjoyed his life there, but obviously at a certain point there was anti-Semitism rising in Poland, and he sensed it was time to leave, which was very clever of him, but he was a very astute man. But so they decided they would leave Poland and emigrate to Belgium, to Antwerp in Belgium, which was good really, because they did avoid what happened afterwards in Poland.
And do you know the kind of decade that did that? Was it in the late 1920s that they did this?
Well, I think it was a little bit later than that. I think it was more early 30s. It was rising. I think it actually became to the fore in 1936. I think things got very bad in Poland, but I think they'd left by then. I don't know the exact date that they left.
And that would have been a big sacrifice, wouldn't it? To know that you have your family there, your family connections, your work there, speaking Polish, and Yiddish probably as well.
Yeah, absolutely Yiddish.
And then having to go to Belgium, a completely different country.
I think it was the beginning of their nomadic life that they had to lead afterwards. But I think my grandfather was a very strong man, and I think he knew when things had to be done. And I think my grandmother was also a very strong lady, and between them they decided that their family must come first rather than their happiness and living in a particular place. They thought it would be better to be safe.
So clearly his probably experience that he faced, probably younger, or certainly his parents would have faced the pogroms
Yes.
the kind of the Russian Tsars.
Yes, the Russian, yes.
And that must have been something that we don't want to repeat of this,
Yes,
rather than
absolutely.
the mainstream thinking, I think, at the time within the Polish community.
But I think it did start, didn't it? The pogroms did start in the 30s in Poland.
Yeah, and how did they manage to, what you know of, how did they manage to build a life for themselves in Antwerp?
In Antwerp. Well, he was a tailor. He offered a service, and he worked very hard, and his wife was very astute. And I remember my mother telling me that she knew every customer. She knew what they'd paid for what, and how much they owed and things like that, and it was all in her head. She never wrote anything down, they did build a life for themselves with their children.
Vivien, I mean, but I know Belgium very well, I know Brussels, and I know that Antwerp, for example, is very famous for being a kind of diamond district, which attracts a lot of Jewish people. A lot of Orthodox Jewish people live in Antwerp even today. But can you just share your grandparents' concern, really, with the rise of Nazism in the late 1930s, particularly their thoughts about the Nazi invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939? Well,
I think that they were absolutely distraught to hear about Adolf Hitler's invasion of Poland. They had family there, and I know that there was one survivor, and his family, but most of my grandparents' family were killed, but obviously this was prior to that, and they were terrified, that the Germans were going to come into Belgium, which they eventually did, and obviously terrified for their children, and also worried that this has happened to them before, maybe not on quite such a large scale, but that why were people persecuting Jews? Why were Jews being targeted? They're human beings, and I think they felt that this was totally wrong and abhorrent, and also extremely fearful of their own lives and the lives of their friends and the rest of the Jewish community in Antwerp, which was very, very strong at the time.
Yeah, we know the horrific Nazi invasion through Blitzkrieg of the Netherlands, and then into Belgium, and then the occupation of France, which literally took a matter of somewhere around 6 weeks. Incredible speed. And what would it have been like then for your grandparents and your mother, Sabrine, who was a teenager at the time, to actually be in Belgium under Nazi occupation?
Well, I think it was terrifying. It was, they would look out of the window and see people being brutally treated, shop windows broken into, the words Juden and other horrible things written all over the shops. They saw a lot of awful things, and they had not registered as being Jewish yet, and so they were terrified. They didn't know what to do, and I know that my grandfather was in a group of people who got together to try and resist what was happening in secret.
It's quite extraordinary. And also, can you share something about your mother, Sabrine, the fact that she probably looked like you, Vivien, as well, with the blonde hair and the kind of blue eyes, that she was not seen as, as being Jewish, so that gave her a lot more freedom to go out and to shop and to really monitor what was going on?
I think this was the sort of beginning of her courage and her bravery, because they did have some food, but she would go out and purchase more. that the difficult thing for her as a young girl would be walking through the streets, seeing the German soldiers and seeing the treatment of Jews, you know, being made to walk in the gutters, just awful treatment of Jews. It was terrifying for her, but she was brave enough to continue to go and do that.
Yeah, and can you share with us the account in your novel of how much you actually know of this situation when she had an encounter with a German, officer?
I think what happened was that she looked quite Aryan, if you like, and she walked past some German soldiers, and one of them took a shine to her, and she walked quickly and tried to get away, and he got hold of her, and she thought this was the end of her life. She was so frightened and so terrified that she made herself vomit over his boots, and he was so shocked that she was able to run away and escape. And she didn't want to tell her family what had happened, but she did. She knew she had to, because this was why they started to move.
Yeah, but also share the incredible wisdom again of your grandfather. What was your grandfather's name?
His name was Shea, which can be translated into Samuel.
And just share the kind of remarkable story that with him, that for example, he didn't go with convention. He didn't go with the kind of wisdom of the Jewish community there in Belgium, which was the Nazis were forcing the Jewish people then to register and to register the fact they were Jewish and wear the yellow star, because he saw this as a death sentence.
He did.
Share with us the incredible insight that he had to do that.
Well, he said to his family when these papers arrived that he wasn't going to sign them in any way. He wasn't going to sign them. And he said, we are not going to sign. And his family was saying, well, we have to. This is the law. We have to. And he said, we don't have to. And we're not going to. And this really helped them. He also said that none of us are to put this yellow star on. We are not going to be parading ourselves as Jews in order to be killed. So they didn't wear the yellow star either. I think my mother got her strength from him. I do
Incredible.
Really believe that.
Incredible. And share with us, I'm giving so much of the book away, but I'm so intrigued, and I'm sure our viewers are as well, about hearing your mother's remarkable story. I know that they'll get the book and
well, it'll be much more detailed than I'm giving
exactly,
here.
But also share how your grandparents then really met up with the Belgian resistance, and how they actually thought that their life was in danger being in Antwerp in Belgium, that they needed to get out. So share with us what you can about the idea of actually going to France, and how remarkable that they were actually smuggled out of Belgium into France, into the countryside.
Okay, so after the incident with the soldier, my grandfather said, well, we'll have to move out of our home now. We'll have to go and be hidden. And they were hidden in various places in Antwerp, different places. And but it got to the point where they thought it was too risky to stay there. So they did get help from the resistance to have a driver to take them in a van to France. And this was horrendous, very tricky journey, obviously. And they were hidden under the floorboards of the van, which was covered in straw. And so that's what they did.
And how long would that journey have been?
I think it would have taken them weeks and weeks.
Wow. And also they face German checkpoints as well.
They did face a German checkpoint. And I know they must have been petrified. My mother said it was the most frightening thing, because she could hear their voices and they prodded the straw with their guns, but they didn't find them.
Amazing.
And that was a miracle. On they went to France to be away from the city. I think they thought that was a better option.
There's one thing I'm beginning to piece together, not only through this interview, but also through your book as well, and that is the incredible foresight that your grandfather had again, to actually then think, look, it's not safe to be in a city. Let's get out to France. It's bigger, open, wide countryside. We're not going to have it touch with that many people around us. This is a safer option. So to have that bravery and that courage to actually do that, even though that France was occupied by the Nazis as well, took incredible foresight, courage, and bravery to think out, constantly thinking outside the box and thinking strategically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it started when he left Poland, and I think as Jews, it was almost inevitable at that time that they didn't have a safe haven to call home.
Yeah, and do you know much about I know you mention it in your novel as well, but do you know much about the barn where your mother and your grandparents?
I know that my mother said it was awful, and she said it was unbearable, and her sister hated it, and my mother was bitten with mosquitoes. She never ever went to France again for the rest of her life. She said it was really, really unbearable. But their father insisted that this was preferable to the alternative, which would be a camp. So I think it was at this time that my mother decided she would try and do something to try and help.
And was that out of boredom?
I don't think it was out of boredom. I think it was because she wasn't a person to sit around and do nothing. I mean, she could read and she could sing and she could play the piano. She was very talented. But I think she felt the urge to do something. And a lot of people are like that, aren't they? They want to do something to try and help others. And that's what she wanted to do.
How much do you know of, and you mentioned in the book as well, of how your mother and your family really connected with the French resistance? And this is, I think, the most amazing part of your mother's story during the Second World War, of joining the French resistance and then helping Jewish children escape Nazi-occupied France to make it to kind of neutral Switzerland. I mean, this is stuff of films. This is kind of Hollywood-esque. And this is what's so incredible.
It is incredible. And she told me very little, but she told me that she joined a youth movement which existed in France at the time, where they trained young people to help these children go through the forest and reach Switzerland. And she begged her father to let her join, which he did eventually, because he and his wife thought that she would be rescued too, that she would be able to be safe in Switzerland. So that was one of the reasons they agreed to it. But so I think it was that she wanted to do something. She trained with them, and that's what she did. She took these children through the woods, through the mountains, through the snow, and it's a good job she was trained to do it, because it must have been horrendous. She had somebody with her who knew, and some Swiss men and women who also were very brave. They helped them to get through as well.
Amazing. And that would have been really dangerous. Probably would have had also, German patrols as well, with dogs as well through the area to try and stop people fleeing into Switzerland. You don't have any idea of how far she probably would have walked, or?
No, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. I know it took a long, arduous trek, she told me, but I don't know how far it is.
But share with us how really the unselfishness of your mother, Sabrine, because the easy option would have been there to, however unbearable the farm or where they were staying or the barn they were staying in, they knew that they were safe there to a certain extent. I don't think they ever felt 100% safe, but they would have felt a lot safe. But then to actually put yourself out to then kind of rescue Jewish children, you put yourself in the firing line.
Yeah.
And just share what type of character your mother was to actually do that, because this is her legacy. The rescuing of these Jewish.
Well,
people,
I think
children.
she inherited this legacy, or this part of her character from her father, because before the war, he used to bring people into the house if they were hungry or if they were homeless, and give them food, which not a lot of people did. And I think that she did the same. She wanted to help others, and I think she remained like that all her life. She always wanted to help people. She was so kind and considerate of others, and she passed that on to us. And I think it's a very, very strong trait to have.
As you describe in the novel, as kind of D-Day approached, and we had the Allied, the Operation Overlord, as it's known, with the Allied forces having a beachhead in Normandy, part of the D-Day landings. Share with us then how your grandparents then decided to go back to Brussels, but this time to be in Brussels, but actually to live so close to the Nazi SS office, which is extraordinary.
They did. I mean, my grandfather thought it was a good idea, because he thought that no one would ever think of looking for Jews hiding opposite the Gestapo headquarters. And so they did live there for a while, and it must have been absolutely terrifying for them to live there. But unfortunately, one day there was a shout at the door, and there were German soldiers were shouting, and they all ran down a fire escape at the back of the flat that they were living in, and ran away and were hidden in a bakery. And the German soldiers didn't go round the back of the building, which was another miracle that happened. They came in with their dogs and guns and everything, and they managed to escape.
Amazing. I definitely think a film needs to be made on your mother's life. Absolutely extraordinary, absolutely gripping and compelling and fascinating. What happened to your mother after the war? Because Belgium and would have been liberated by the Allied forces.
Well, she spoke a number of languages, and she worked in the Nuremberg trials as a translator, which I think was very cathartic for her, because she could see perpetrators of these crimes being charged. And there was one incident where she was in the ladies' toilets, and she listened to the two cleaners in there, and they'd said that they were commandants in one of the camps, these two women, and my mother was terrified. She could understand what they were saying. So she ran and told one of the officers of the court, and they were promptly arrested.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did your mother get to England? Tell us that story.
Before the war, my grandfather's brother moved to London, and he lived in London, and she came to visit him, and some friends of his introduced my mother to my father, and that's how she met him and lived, because he was a doctor, he had a practice in Liverpool, and when he asked her to marry him, and he said if she didn't, he would give up everything. And so she said yes.
Amazing.
And she moved to Liverpool.
Yeah. And Vivien, why is it so important for you as well to tell your mother's story, Sabrine's story? Why is it so important?
It's important to tell my mother's story because the Holocaust, whether or not you were in a camp or whether you suffered because of the war, is so important to tell because it should never, ever happen again. And we need to educate people. We need to tell people what happened. People think, oh, it'll never happen again. But there is constant anti-Semitism that exists now. And it's only with educating people, particularly young people, about what could happen if things escalated in terms of anti-Semitism.
Okay, now another student from St David's College is now going to play some music for us on his cello. Oliver Pierce won the Independent Schools Association Young Musician of the Year award last year, so we're delighted to have him here to entertain us. Oliver.
Hello, thank you for having me. Today I'm going to be playing some movements from Bach's First Suite, which includes the Prelude, Allemande, Sarabande, and Minuet 1 and Minuet 2.
Thank you very, very much, Oliver. That was really good to hear. Thank you so much. Now, we are here today primarily to remember the Holocaust of 80 years ago, when over 6 million people were murdered simply because they were Jews. The root cause of such an horrific event, as Vivien and Churney mentioned at the end of the clip that we showed, was the evil of anti-Semitism. But this evil did not end with the war. It has grown worse ever since. This past year has seen the largest loss of life for the Jewish people in a single day since the Holocaust, when over 1,200 people were massacred on the 7th of October, the festival of Simchat Torah. The Community Security Trust, who monitor anti-Semitic incidents in the UK, have reported that the number of such incidents committed since that date has increased fivefold over the same period in 2022. The number up to the end of the year was over 2,000. That's in under 3 months. But these statistics are not just numbers. They are real Jewish people being attacked on our streets, in public transport, online, etc. Our next speaker is our good friend, Rabbi Amir Elitug from the Shahari Zedek Synagogue in Manchester. I've asked him to give us a picture of how his congregation and the Jewish people in his area are coping with this increased anti-Semitism. At the conclusion of his talk, he will be leading us into Hebrew prayers, Al-Malay Rachamim, followed by the Kaddish. Rabbi.
Dignitaries, friends, it is an honour to attend this year's Holocaust Remembrance event. We in Manchester are proud as a congregation to support this special evening hosted by the Christian North Wales Friends of Israel. If there was ever a year where such remembrances are needed and are ever more important, it is this year. Over 110 days after the horrendous massacre and the atrocities that took place on October the 7th, a day where the most Jewish blood was shed on a single day since the end of the Holocaust in 1945, a day which we thought would never take place, and yet it did. We as a Jewish community have suffered a huge rise in anti-Semitic attacks and incidents in a way that is never reported, yet we carry the burden. Anti-Semitic attacks doesn't manifest itself simply by daubing synagogues, smashing windows of Jewish businesses, or beating up Jews. These days, the mutation of anti-Semitism is seen through the gaslighting of Jews. It is seen through the libelous attacks on Israel. It is seen through the repeating patterns of what took place during the Holocaust and how we as a community feel about it. We ask ourselves time and time again, how did such a human tragedy occur during the Second World War? How did the world remain silent when the Jewish people were gassed in the concentration camps and the bodies burnt in the crematorium? How could the world remain silent when the calculated, real genocide of millions of Jews took place in Europe and the silence was deafening? We understood that and felt it so harshly during the silence a few days after October the 7th. Yes, people reached out to us as a community, sending love, showing pity, expressing shock, but that was a very small minority. The silence of the majority was deafening. Never again is now. Having deep-lying wounds reopened and feeling isolated and alone is something that we as a Jewish community are used to over the centuries. But in a day when the world uses taglines and hashtags of Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Save Ukraine, but when it came to the Jews, it wasn't valid. When we suffered, there were no blue screens, there were no protests nor demonstrations, few condemnations, and very few buildings lit up. Instead, the protests were against the Jewish state defending themselves. The condemnations tended to avoid the hostages. Never in recent history have so many women and children been taken hostage and the world remains silent. Never has there been such a calculated attack against women, and the world remains silent. Never again is now. The lessons of the Holocaust have not been learned. Rather, the ability to twist history, twist facts, and criticize the Jews defending themselves. We had a guest speaker speak in our community. She's an Italian Jewish cook. Her mum, a survivor, every year gets dozens of invitations to speak at Holocaust events. This year, she received 6. Manchester Jewish Museum gets dozens of schools every month coming over to their place to learn about Jewish history. Since October the 7th, only a handful have come. Our synagogue hosts many schools to learn about Judaism. We had cancellations, something that had never occurred before. There was a local school in our area that hosted a charity event for UNICEF and the children of Gaza. We told them that we can't decide for the school what they do and can't do. But if they aren't mentioning anything about the hostages, the suffering on both sides, an option to raise charity to a cross-denominational charity that helps all children suffering from war trauma, regardless which side you are on. But still, there was no change. We said, surely you are creating an atmosphere where you paint one side bad and the other side the only one suffering, when really both sides are suffering. Jewish victimhood is ignored. Jewish people are the ones causing the suffering, when the reality is that the Jewish state did not start the conflict and did not want this conflict. During the Holocaust, we saw international aid agencies fail with their commitment to get information or aid across Jews in Europe. The Red Cross were guilty in hiding the Nazi crimes. They were not fit in achieving what they were purported to do. We see history repeat itself with United Nations agencies. 15 employees of UNRWA took part in the atrocities of October the 7th. Countless aid bags from the UN has been seen stuffed with ammunition, guns, bulletproof vests, all supplying the terrorists. The aid agencies have allowed the most dense area in the Gaza Strip allowed to build a vast network of tunnels greater than the London Underground, under their very noses. Just like the Red Cross in Europe ignored the vast network of death camps under Nazi Europe. Never again means now. My son is on the front line fighting as a lone soldier for the Israeli Defense Forces. His unit has just finished their tour of Gaza. And when he came out, we spoke. He said, aside from the vast amount of tunnels that they had found, the thing that has shocked them is the amount of Nazi propaganda, Hitler-loving literature, Bin Laden glorifying literature that has been seen in so many houses. Never again is now. Israel is fighting against an area so steeped in hatred. The world has allowed a repeat of 1930s Europe. It has allowed the very virulent anti-Semitic hatred that was so prevalent in Europe to be accepted again, albeit against Israel, the only Jewish state in the world, the only democratic state in the Middle East, the only free-loving country surrounded by countries wishing to remove it from the face of the earth. Never again is now. We as a Jewish community know that this is a sad reality of life. We are used to it. We have learned to live with it. But we won't be silent. The Jewish response is mixed. Do we feel safe? No. Isn't it crazy that many Jews living in the UK, France, and the USA feel safer in a country that has a constant barrage of missiles, is under a state of war, has countries wishing to destroy it, yet in Israel we feel safer than in peaceful Britain, where we have been living since the times of Oliver Cromwell. We may live in a time where our community on Earth, having a mezuzah, a small piece of parchment by our doorpost, we need to go through the locked gates of our houses of worship and through the many guards patrolling our schools and communal events, because that is the reality that we live in. But all is not doom and gloom. We are able to speak over here and have a warm reception and connection with the North Wales Christian Friends of Israel. Those who look beyond the media and see the reality on the ground do understand what is really happening. I wish to share with you a positive story that I was inspired by my son Yosef, who I said earlier serves in the IDF. A few weeks ago, their unit suffered their first casualty, and as parents, we are part of various parents' WhatsApp groups connected to their unit. As events were unfolding, on one group, one parent was getting updates from the officer in the field and updating the parents. You would think that the parents would freeze in fear, but no. On another group, they were organizing prayers and who would read which chapters of Psalms for the injured and those who fell in battle. In another group, parents were organizing how to get schnitzels and other home-cooked foods to the soldiers in the front. And in another group, parents were trying to organize which homes would look after the stray dogs that my son's unit had adopted during battle and needed a home. When tragedy strikes, when we face persecution, we deal with it through kindness and looking out for one another. We may be facing difficulties. We have old traumas opened up. We have seen the patterns of anti-Semitism repeat itself like it did during the Holocaust. But we will stand up and we say, never again means now. We feel sorry for people living in a society and blindly accepting what is written out there. Education, education, education is the only thing that will stop conflict, stop brainwashing innocents, stop allowing anti-Semitism to keep rearing its ugly head and make never again mean now and mean it. We pray for all the victims of this conflict. We pray for the return of the hostages, and we pray that everyone can return to their homes in a period of peace and tranquility. And we thank you, the North Wales Christian Friends of Israel, for your loyal support and for showing that never again means now. Thank you. can you please be upstanding? And we're going to hear a recording of the memorial prayer El Malei Rachamim, which was recited in Bergen-Belsen in the Council of Liberty.
המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים ותיארים כזהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות אחינו בני ישראל שנהרגו באושוויץ, בלזק, ברגן-בלזן, דכאו, מיידנק, סוביבור, טרבלינקה ובשאר מחנות השמד באירופה. בעבור שאנו מתפללים על הזכרת נשמתם בגן עדן, תהי מנוחת הבן. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסדק כנפיו לעולמים יצרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני ונחלתם וינוחו על משכבם בשלום ונאמר
יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה ועלמד יברח ירותה וימליך מלכותה ויצמח פורקנה ויקרב משיחה בחייכם וביומכם ובחיי בכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מברך לעלם לעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מכל בריחתה שירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה, חיים ושבע בישועה ונחמה ושזבה ורפואה וגאולה וסליחה וכפרה, ברווח והצלה לנו ולכל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. Ask Fran Hyman to give words of thanks.
Distinguished guests, Rabbi Amir, ladies and gentlemen, I consider myself fortunate to be invited to acknowledge, on behalf of the small North Wales Jewish community, our sincere appreciation to all those involved with tonight's event. I have attended this event for a few years now including those meetings that were held on Zoom during COVID. It is, as we have heard this evening, increasingly important that we continue to remember those Jewish men, women and children who perished during that dreadful time, and to also to combat anti-Semitism, which has once again begun to surface. As time goes on, and this year we commemorate 80 years since the D-Day landings, those who survived are fewer in number. It is up to their families and relatives to relate and document their histories. I must mention a few individuals who, without their continuing support and hard-working efforts, events such as this would not be possible. Roy Thurley and his wife Jackie worked tirelessly to put together such an interesting programme and bring together a large gathering with different beliefs and from all over North Wales. Now, Billy Griffiths and James Taylor gave a moving speech of their account of the visit to Auschwitz. Their moving account certainly resonated with me. And I also wish to thank all the pupils from, and excuse my Welsh pronunciation here, from Ysgol, Dyffryn, Conwy. I believe they've left, I expect they have school tomorrow morning. And their pianist, Larry Williams. What beautiful voices they had. The kinder transport has been in the news frequently with the new film, One Life. Andrew Hesketh introduced us to life at Gwrych Castle, Abergele during the war. It certainly was Spartan. I would certainly like to visit that castle. Thank you to Rabbi Amir for sharing how the rise in anti-Semitism has affected our communities. What can I say? It was most moving and resonated with me. And thank you for leading us in the prayers tonight. Throughout the evening, Christine has provided musical accompaniment on the piano, and Oliver Pearce entertained us on the cello. Well done, Oliver. Now, without Sophie Spree, there wouldn't be any video recordings. And thank you, Sophie, for putting together that interview with Vivien Churney. I know you didn't have much time to do that. The projection work this evening was ably undertaken by Kevin Fisher. Thank you. I can't forget to mention Sean Ashridge, who coordinates the school visits. Her sterling work is much appreciated. Llandudno Town Council and Conwy CBC have been generous contributors for a number of years, and we've very much appreciated their continuing support. This is the second year this event has been held at the St.George's Hotel, and we thank them for facilitating this evening. My thanks go to everyone involved, and I wish you all a safe journey home. Shalom and Noch Star.
Thank you, Fran. Okay, can you please now stand for the two national anthems? We shall be singing first the Israeli national anthem, Hatikvah, in Hebrew. We know from historical records that many of the Jewish people who were killed in the extermination camps went to their deaths in the gas chambers singing this song. So it is highly appropriate that we should sing it at this commemoration. And after that, we will be singing the first verse and chorus of the Welsh national anthem in Welsh. Okay, thank you, Chris. seated. I trust that you have found this evening to be a moving and memorable experience. I certainly have. Thank you again to all those who've taken part, and to you all in the audience for coming. Good night. Good night.